Hello, my name is Angie, and today I'll be discussing the effects of crime rates on urbanizing cities and developing nations. It's no secret that our world is becoming rapidly more industrialized, with the effects of globalization and our helping of other countries that aren't so fortunate to be as postmodern as some of the Western ones are. It's estimated that by 2050, most of the world's populations will be living in cities. And this is globally, not just in Western developed nations, especially in places like Asia, namely China, and Latin America, in countries such as Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Costa Rica. Of course, it's also no surprise that crime rates are often linked to cities. The anonymity of a city setting allows for criminals to basically blend in easier than they would in the suburban areas and rural countries. Especially with the presence of organized crime in some of these developing areas, it's reason to worry for the citizens moving into these certain territories. Today we'll be discussing the effects of potentially rising crime rates and urbanizing cities, and how we can stop or decrease them. So, this is a map of homicides in 2016 by country, and most of the major ones appear to be here in North America, here in the Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil sector, and over here in China, the Philippines, and surprisingly, India. India is not exactly the place you'd think for homicide. Sure, there's a conflict with Pakistan, but a lot of Indian homicides spring from their culture, which is something to consider when coming in with all these crime rates. Most Indian crimes, as done by a study in 2017, are committed by people over property, money, or women. Because these are traditionally three things very important to Indian society since, well, the country was conceived. But an issue that can be spread not just in India, but to every developing area of the world, is the social fabric. The social fabric is the general terminology for the sort of interconnectedness a community has. The stronger the social fabric, the more tight that members of a community are together. A weaker social fabric indicates that the community doesn't have as much trust in one another. A study done by the University of Michigan shows that criminals are actually attracted to areas with weaker social fabric because those people, especially if there's someone just out in the city trying to build themselves up from nothing or just from what their parents gave them, are easy targets because they don't have a support system to fall back on. The issue with a weakening social fabric, especially with crime rates, is that if the social fabric's weak, it can cause issues such as paranoia, anxiety, depression in people who get targeted by criminals attracted to this weakened social fabric, and these mental issues that tend to plague a victim for months, years, decades, for the rest of their lifespan sometimes after these crimes are committed, are something that we don't want to expose these people to. So now we get into some politics that are involved with crime. The issue with a lot of crime preventing legislation is that it's passed at a federal level, and it's not very heavily enforced by the federal government because, it'd be a lot of money that they'd have to take from taxpayers to send federal police to every single major crime spot in a country. So oftentimes, it is left to local policymakers to create policies, laws, strengthen or weaken their police force depending on the situation, and deal with the problems themselves. A good example of this is Brazil. Brazil, despite kind of having a reputation as a slum-infested, not-so-nice place to live, has actually ran a program that was surprisingly successful in its runtime. From about 2015 to 2017, Brazil ran the Prozanassi program, which essentially strengthened the social fabric we talked about earlier. It helped people get in touch with their police. It helped people learn how to, identify and get away from crime situations. and, sort of identify the potential indicators that someone may or may not be looking to commit a crime on them. The program was unfortunately discontinued, but this was due to lack of funding and the inability to spread it outwards. Believe it or not, impoverished people are not actually the problem here. Studies show that someone's economic status typically doesn't affect whether or not they do a crime or not. While people tend to point their fingers at the impoverished, this is not exactly the case. But the real issue with the sort of economic factor of all this is organized crime and the money they have. This is especially a problem in Latin America, where drug cartels often run cities, if not entire governments, with their drug money through bribes, threats, a little bit of both. In countries such as El Salvador and Mexico, there are literally cities where it is split between two gangs or cartels, and civilians are forced to live on one side or the other. Fights tend to break out in the streets. The government isn't really stopping it. It's an all-around mess, and quite frankly, it's, something that people should be worried about, to say the least. It's not like it's going to spread to the entirety of the United States tomorrow, but already in areas that are immigrant-heavy, branches of these gangs have popped up in places such as Houston, for example. So what can we do to fix it? As stated before, it's basically up to local policymakers and average civilians just like ourselves. Because the federal government can't effectively shut down crime everywhere, because regardless of what you do, it's going to happen. It's up to local policymakers to sort of create a system where people are informed, have a support network to fall back onto, and to create a safe environment where organized crime such as cartels can't exactly flourish, to say the least. Programs such as the Pro-Sanasi program on a wider scale would be super effective in these instances, providing civilians with a sense of comfort and security while also educating them on the potential factors of someone about to commit a crime and getting them involved with their local police department so that they know